Welcome to Chapter 4. This is the Roman Republic. I'm going to jump right in here. We have been studying the ancient Greeks who dominated and controlled the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. And now we're going to be shifting west to the Italian peninsula. You can see here the Italian peninsula. We've got the Adriatic Sea, which is on the east side. It separates um, the Italian peninsula from the rest of Europe. You've got the Tyrrhenian Sea, which separates the Italian peninsula from Corsica and Sardinia, the two big islands right over here. You can see those two. And then, of course, Sicily out here at the tip of the boot. And then you've got the Ionian Sea that separates Greece from the Italian peninsula. So those are the three bodies of water that surround Italy and make it quite distinct from the experience of the Greeks and their interaction with the world around them. So let's take a look here. So look, you can see the red there. That's the Greeks we've been looking at, centered on the Aegean Sea, Macedonia, Greece, the island of Crete, even the eastern side of the Aegean Sea along the coast of Asia Minor is all Greek city-states and Greek colonies. You can see in the green here, on the western side of the Mediterranean Sea, the North Africa is Carthage, and they've got colonies there on Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, and other islands in the western part of the Mediterranean. Again, there's our three seas that we've got surrounding. Those will be on a map, so you'll want to know those, the Adriatic, Tyrrhenian, and Ionian seas. Of course, that's all right in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea that makes up the entire body of water here. So here are some Greek colonies. The Greeks didn't just have their city-states on the mainland of Greece, but they colonized a good portion of the southern part of the Italian peninsula, as well as a good portion, maybe half of the island of Sicily, as well as some colonies over there at Corsica and Sardinia. You can see all those pink areas. Those are all Greek colonies. So you can see the Mediterranean world is pretty well divided between the Carthaginians, which, by the way, are related to the Phoenicians. If you remember the Phoenicians, who were just north and west of Israel and Syria, the Phoenicians, if you remember, we said they were the purple people. And they were maritime sea traders, and they established colonies all over the Mediterranean. Well, the Carthaginians were descendants of the Phoenicians, and so they're part of that rich tradition there. But they continue to set up colonies all over the Mediterranean. It's in this environment that right in the middle of this, the Italian peninsula, a group of people called the Latins are going to establish themselves along the Tiber River, along the seven hills that we now call the Seven Hills of Rome and central Italy, and they will eventually become the Roman Empire. So let's take a look at this. There's the Latins right there. Let me move this out of the way. There's where Rome will eventually be. But they weren't the only ones in the Italian peninsula, not just the Greeks with their colonies and the Carthaginians with their colonies, but you had to the north of the Latins a group of people called the Etruscans. And then to the north of that, of them also, is the Umbrians. And to the east, you had people called the Samnites. And there were other people groups and other tribes, but these were the major tribal groups that made up the people groups of the Italian peninsula that the Latins are going to eventually come in contact with and eventually control and form the Roman Republic and then the Empire. So let's see here. What else did I say? Oh, yeah, you've probably heard of this. Rome was legendarily founded by Romulus and Remus, and you know that whole story where they were put in a basket in the river, and a she-wolf found them and rescued them and nursed them, and eventually a shepherd and his wife raised the boys. They eventually founded Rome. Romulus killed his brother Remus because they couldn't decide where to build the city, and Romulus built the city where he wanted it and named it after himself, and thus we have Rome. So this is where they started it right there on the Tiber River, Tiber, and in 753 is when the beginning of Rome has its founding. The founding of Rome is 753 BC. All right, so this is about 1,000 years after, say, Hammurabi in the Far East, the Middle East. the Law Code of Hammurabi, if you remember that, the Mesopotamian time period. So we've traveled down a bit in the timeline. Matter of fact, let's look at the timeline here and show you what we're looking at here. Here's our ancient timeline. Everything before 500 BC we call the ancient time period. The classical period is what we're in right now with the Greek and the Romans. Eventually, after 500 AD, we'll be in the medieval and then the modern. But here's the ancient. Remember all these guys, the Sumerians and the Babylonians, the Egyptians, Assyrians, Neo-Babylonians, Persians. See if this brings to memory some stuff here. Let's see if this looks familiar. Does this look familiar? Hittites. Yeah, there we go. There's the Mesopotamians, the Hittites, the Persians, the Canaanites. There's the Syrians, Phoenicians, Hebrews, and of course the Egyptians. So that's the time period we've covered already, but we've shifted over to the classic period, and we've just been studying the Greeks the last week or so, and then the Roman civilization, and that's where we're at right now. So let's take a look at the Romans here. Oh, before we do that, let's check out here. Remember our 3 periods of Greek civilization, right? Now we're looking at the Romans. We're going to have the monarchy time period. Look, it began in 753. We just said that. The monarchy, and then in 509 it's going to become a republic for about 500 years until 27 BC when it becomes an empire, which lasts for another roughly 500 years. So Roman civilization, basically, what is that, about 1,200, 1,300 years there? Let's take a look at this here. There we go. So we've got our prehistory, which involves the Trojan War. I think we mentioned this last week when we talked about the Greeks, that when the Greeks beat the Trojans, that Aeneas, one of the Trojans, left Troy and eventually found his way, according to Roman mythology, found his way to Italy, and it was his descendants. There's Aeneas's journey right here. It is his descendants, that Romulus and Remus, that will found Rome. Ab urbe condita, from the founding of Rome. That's what they call it. We use BC and AD. They use time ab urbe condita as the means of declaring what time it was. So 753 BC is when Rome was founded. And all of this we know from the writings of Homer and Virgil. There's Homer wrote during this time period. Virgil's going to write the Aeneid in 19 BC. But all of this information is where we get the story of the Trojan War, Aeneas, and Romulus and Remus. So after the prehistory, we've got our monarchy time period, which we're going to look at here in just a minute. Okay, we're going to talk about our kings. The monarchy is the time of the kings, and Romulus is the first king. And the last king, is a guy by the name of Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. And in 509 BC, they get rid of the kings and they become a republic. We're moving down the timeline. All kinds of stuff going on here. Some wars, the Samnite Wars, the Punic Wars. We've got some civil wars. And of course, you know Julius Caesar, right? The first triumvirate. We'll talk about that in a minute. He gets assassinated. Second triumvirate. And of course, it concludes here with Augustus becoming Caesar. So that's the Republic time period, about a 500-year history. And then lastly here, the Empire. And then you've got all these different, you may recognize the name Tiberius. He was the emperor when Jesus was alive and doing his ministry and was crucified. You can see Jesus' life here. Nero, you may know him. He's a very famous, crazy emperor. And it was during this time period that Rome caught fire. He blamed it on the Christians. Eventually, Peter and Paul are martyred, executed under the authority of Nero. You got some Jewish revolts. Mount Vesuvius, the volcano, is going to go off. We got some other crazy emperors you may have heard of, Trajan and Hadrian. If you like the movie Gladiator, Marcus Aurelius, right? That's the guy who's kind of played here as the father of the crazy emperor. And then eventually we're going to have a guy by the name of Constantine we'll be talking about later, and then the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. So this is kind of our time frame that we're looking at in the next week or two here. So let's take a look at here. This is the geography of Rome, the Italian peninsula rather. A couple of things you want to notice. A couple of things you want to notice here is that surrounded by, again, bodies of water. You've got the Adriatic Sea here, the Ionian Sea, and of course the Tyrrhenian Sea over here. The other thing that's very noticeable is right down the center, the spine of the island, it's very mountainous, very mountainous. And this is what's going to allow some of these city, not city states, but these city tribal community areas to sort of um, grow on their own, sort of isolated. But eventually, these mountains will be overcome, and they will not be an obstacle to the Romans uniting these tribes to themselves. But you can see these are called the Apennine Mountains here. Oh, sorry, there's Corsica and Sardinia and Sicily. You'll want to know those. But there's the Apennine Mountains all the way down the spine. And another very interesting geographical feature is up here. This is called the Po River Valley, with the Po River running right through it into the emptying into the Adriatic Sea. And oops, of course, you got the Swiss Alps, which really protect the Italian peninsula from the northern European tribes that will want to eventually put pressure on the Italians. So this is those Alps are very important for protecting them. So that's the topography of the Italian peninsula. And there's, of course, the Tiber River, where Rome eventually will be founded right there. So Italy does have great farming land, but unlike Greece, its geography did not keep the Latins from expanding and uniting the people into groups, the people groups in Italy. We said that the Greeks, the city-states, were very individualistic, had a very different identity because they were separated by islands and water and difficult mountain ranges. Italy's geography didn't seem to keep unification very much of a problem. They were able to do that fairly well. It is the Alps, however, and the seas that deter outsiders from conquering the Italian peninsula. And in that sense, the Italian peninsula remains a little bit relatively isolated. So the Latins, they're in the middle, as I mentioned a minute ago, are going to consolidate their power. They're going to unify the various Latin tribes in central Italy, and they're going to begin to expand. They had been under control of the Etruscans, which I showed you just a minute ago, and they're eventually going to overthrow the Etruscans. It's the Etruscans who make up the majority of the kings during the monarchy time period. So the Romans are actually Etruscan, dominated by the Etruscans during this period. But eventually in 509 will overthrow the last Etruscan king. And they will also overthrow the Greek colonies that are in the south. But their biggest competitor is going to come from outside Italy, and it's going to be the Carthaginians in North Africa. As I mentioned, these are descendants of the Phoenicians. But again, they were so incredibly adept at seafaring that they had established colonies all over the Western Mediterranean. So it's the Carthaginians that are going to be a problem for them, as well as the Greeks. So the Romans, now the Latins, really is a better term at this point. They've consolidated power in the Italian peninsula, and now they're going to go to work to start to control the Western peninsula, and then eventually the Eastern peninsula. And at that point, they will have control of the entire Mediterranean Sea and the sea trade that occurs across Europe, Africa, and Asia. And they're going to control all that. And that's going to make the Roman Empire such a strong, powerful force. So let's see here. Let's go to here. So first thing is they got to conquer the Carthaginians. And so we have a series of wars called the Punic Wars. Punic was the Latin word for Phoenician. And so this shows you how that they're connected with the Phoenicians. But they're going to have 3 wars. There's basically over the course of about 100 years, from 264 to 146. Main thing I want you to know is during the second one, pretty famous, this is where a very famous Carthaginian general, here's a bust of him. His name is Hannibal. And he's got his armies in Spain. That's where one of the colonies of the Carthaginians. And he's basically going to march his army, including a multitude of elephants, into southern France, over the Alps, which was crazy, and into Italy. And they're just going to absolutely devastate the Roman cities and countrysides. He did not attack Rome directly, but he devastated the Roman cities and villages, all kinds of carnage. It looked like Rome was going to collapse, but the Romans are going to send a general by the name of Scipio. And here's his name right here, Scipio. And they're going to send him to attack Carthage directly, which is going to force Hannibal to bring his armies back over to North Africa, and there he gets soundly defeated. And then, so that's the end of the Second Punic War. The Romans will have one more with them about 50 years later, and this will basically be the final collapse of the Carthaginians. And this will give the Romans control of North Africa and all of the western part of the Mediterranean world. Here's a map of the Second Punic War. You can see all the different battles that the Romans had against all these little swords, cross swords, or battles that they had with with Hannibal. You can see this is where he started out, marched his army, including the elephants, over the Alps and into Italy. The Battle of Cannae, which is right here, completely devastated the Romans. Lost an entire legion, thousands of Roman soldiers killed or captured. But eventually, when Scipio came to Carthage in North Africa, Hannibal had to follow to protect his city, and that's where he lost. So that is the end of the Punic Wars, and now Rome. Look, Rome has control of the entire Italian peninsula, but all of southern France and Spain, the coastal areas of Spain, North Africa, and all the islands. So now they've got this consolidated. Now they can move east, and at this time period, the east is controlled by, remember the generals at the death of Alexander the Great? His generals divided his empire. Well, we said the Seleucids took over Asia Minor and Syria and the Holy Land. The Ptolemies took over Egypt, and then the Antigonids took over Macedonia and the Greek mainland. So it's this direction that the Romans are going to begin to move. And so let's see here. So Rome defeated the Macedonians and the Syrians. The Egyptians will basically give in and say, we promise to be loyal and faithful to Rome if you don't destroy us. So they will become a vassal of the Roman Empire. And by the end of the 2nd century, Rome had control over the entire Mediterranean Sea, making it totally what they called it, Mare Nostra, our sea. That was pretty arrogant, but they had complete control of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, a little bit about Roman society. That's how Roman Empire sort of formed itself. What about the Roman society? Well, the center of Roman society was the family, and the father had a complete authority over the family, which included not only his wife and children, but the slaves and other family members as well. He was called the pater familias, the father of the family. And he even had control over life and death within the family. He could have his own kids killed or his wife killed, and it was within his legal authority. Families formed clans, and clans formed tribes within the Roman society, and this is how they had their structure. Within this, there were two classes of people. The patricians, you'll want to know that word. They were the folks who controlled all the land, and they were basically the noble, wealthy families. They had an incredible amount of influence and power. And then, of course, there were the poor folks. The majority of them, they were called the plebeians. They were the inferior common people. But these were the two main classes of Roman society. The earliest form of government was a monarchy, which you know what that is. We talked about that a week or so ago with the Greeks. It was a king. And they were dominated by Etruscan kings. He was a chief priest, an army commander, administrator of justice. He was basically elected by the people to be the king for life. That they actually elected him. So he didn't get his power because he came to power through a military battle. He came to power because people elected him to be king for life. And he had a council of leaders that would basically provide him some counsel. Here's some important things: that they would give him a purple toga to wear that symbolized his power and his position. They give him red shoes, a special chair called a curule to sit upon. It's kind of like a stool, really, a cot. And then really cool thing, it's an axe that's been bundled up with sticks called a fasces. And this symbolized his authority and power. So if he had a purple robe, red shoes, and his fasces, you knew this guy was the king. But this is a very important symbol in Roman culture. Eventually, the monarchy will fall apart in 509. The Romans will get rid of the last Etruscan king, a guy by the name of Tarquinius Superbus. He was a very bad dude, tyrannical ruler. And we're going to start, as I mentioned earlier, the Republic period, which is basically going to go from 509 to 31 or 27 BC, depending on when you want to date it. This is going to be the Republic that has three branches of government: the consul, senate, and assemblies. These are terms you've probably heard before. Let's talk about the consuls real quick. They're elected to serve. There's two of them elected at a time for 1 year each. So they only serve for 1 year, and there's two of them. And the reason why they did this was checks and balances. We've heard of checks and balance power in our own government. Well, they did the same thing. Two consuls, so that neither one of them could do anything disastrous without the approval of the other. And secondly, it's hard to do a whole lot of damage if you're only in there for a year. So this is how they ensured that things did not get out of control. But these guys were in charge of the army, supreme judge. They were the supreme judges, controlled everyday affairs of the republic. But then there's a Senate, and these are basically, remember the patricians, the noble class? Well, this is basically them. And they're appointed for life to be in the Senate. And they're going to create the laws, they're going to drive the foreign policy, and importantly, control the finances. If a consul wanted to go to war, they had to go to the Senate for the finances. And again, we have something similar to that in our own government. The president can declare war, but the Senate has to approve the funding, or the Congress. And then lastly, there's the assemblies. These are people that make up the assemblies and vote on the laws, make declarations of war, and the decisions they made could be vetoed by the Senate. But these were important people that were of the common class, not just the no, actually, sorry, these were still patricians, but they were not in the Senate. These were just general assemblies. But that, of course, left the plebeians with no authority or power, and eventually plebeians are going to fight for the right to have their own tribunes to help govern them and represent them. Important enough here, Roman law is going to be inscribed on 12 tablets and placed in the Roman Forum, which is the center of Rome. And the law, it's called the Law of 12 Tables. This was really important because with laws are written down and publicly displayed, it's hard for those who are in control to do things that are illegal and infringe upon the rights of the people if the laws are publicly displayed and published. And so this was a big step forward to have these laws published like this. Eventually, plebeians were able to have their own assembly that gave them more authority and representation. But this is going to be a constant point of contention with between the patricians and the plebeians. So a couple of civil wars are going to happen. Rome is expanding its control over other territories, very powerful, but it's the internal struggle and corruption that's going to be the undoing of the republic. Here's what's happening. Got all these soldier farmers. You got to remember, the soldiers were not professional soldiers. They were just basically farmers that were called to come fight. And they would be gone for years sometimes at a time. And so when they come back, sometimes they had lost their farms or their land because their wives still had to pay taxes and take care of things while they were gone and couldn't pay. And the next thing you know, they've lost their farms, they lost their lands. These guys were homeless. Their families were homeless. They were poor. And there was a lot of restlessness going on here. They couldn't farm, couldn't find jobs because, by the way, all the small menial jobs that they might do were taken over by slaves. So much conquering and bringing back of slaves from conquered territories meant all of the menial jobs were taken, and they couldn't farm, they couldn't find a job. This is the recipe for revolt and civil war. Aristocratic, noble Roman families who controlled the Senate grew more wealthy at the expense of the poor and ignored their pleas for change. So this is going to be bad. A pair of brothers called the Gracchi, or Gracchus brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, are each going to get elected to be tribune of the plebes, and they're going to attempt to make some social and legal reforms. The Senate is not going to have anything of it. And when Tiberius was elected to be the tribune of the plebes, he eventually is going to be clubbed to death along with 300 of his supporters in 133 BC. 10 years later, his brother is elected as tribune of the plebes, and after 2 years, he's going to commit suicide because he knows he's about to be executed. 3,000 of his own followers were put to death right after he committed suicide. So this reforms, they were great, but they didn't go anywhere because these guys were killed or committed suicide. They gave it a valiant effort, though. Another civil war is going to start between a guy by the name of Sulla and Marius. Both of these guys are military leaders and heroes, but they're going to have different approaches. Marius rather, is going to be, the people are going to love him, primarily because he tries to do some reforms as well, and including taking care of the soldiers by making sure they get land and money because they fight for Rome. This is going to be a good thing in a sense, except here's one problem. They're going to become more loyal to their general rather than Rome, so that will be problematic. But Sulla, there's Sulla. He didn't want to have anything to do with that. He was supported by the Senate. And these two are going to fight for control and for their own agendas. Marius loses and Sulla wins. And so again, no long-term reforms really happen because the rich and powerful Senate, basically are going to continue to dominate. There's going to be one more civil war here. Julius Gaius Caesar, that's him right here, is going to form the first triumvirate. Triumvirate means three-man rule. There's Caesar, and this is a guy by the name of Pompey, and this is a guy by the name of Crassus. And they're going to each desire to control the Roman government in their own ways, and they have got their own agendas, but they can't do it by themselves. So they kind of need each other, but they're each sort of plotting against each other. Eventually, Crassus, right here, he's going to die in battle in the east, and it's going to leave Julius Caesar and Pompey to fight it out as they basically conspire against one another. Eventually, Pompey, by the way, has the support of the Senate, and Caesar has the support of the people and the soldiers. Eventually, Pompey loses and has to run for his life to Egypt, and he gets killed by an Egyptian official down there thinking that's what Julius Caesar wants. That's not what he wanted. He gets killed for it. But anyway, let's see here. We just said all of this. Julius Caesar, after he becomes the sole ruler, is going to declare himself dictator for life and is going to work towards bringing reforms for the common people. But this isn't going to sit well with the senators. And they are threatened by his popularity, and they fear his power. They're going to assassinate him famously on the Ides of March in 44 BC. So Julius Caesar's gone. But hey, we're not done with civil wars. Julius Caesar's nephew, Augustus, and one of his close friends, Mark Antony, are going to seek to punish all of those who kill him. Eventually, they're going to control and divide the empire. But hey, because we can't control things without fighting, we're going to fight. That's Cleopatra, by the way. She just left. They're going to fight against each other for control of the Roman Empire, and Mark Antony is going to have the support of Cleopatra. They both lose at the Battle of Actium, a naval battle in 31 BC, and they're both going to commit suicide, and that's going to leave old Mr. Octavian as the sole ruler of Rome. He's going to be the first emperor, and now we're transitioning. The Roman Republic is gone officially, although really it had been gone for a few decades already. But now we have officially the Roman Empire beginning, and this is what it looks like. The entire Mediterranean world has been taken over by the Romans, and this is where we sit for the beginning of the Roman Empire, the end of the Republic.